Good morning, everyone. One of the forms of karbanot that was discussed in yesterday's Torah reading and will be discussed again in this week's Torah portion is known as the shlamim. The shlamim karban literally means the peace offering karban. And Rashi says that it's a karban that brings peace in the world because it creates peace and harmony between the Jew and Hashem, between man and his fellow man. How does it bring peace between man and his fellow man? We can understand an offering brings you closer to Hashem and creates peace between man and God. How does it create peace between man and man? So the explanation is that the shlamim, some sacrifices were completely offered on the altar and there was no benefit to either the Kohen or the individual. Some karbanot only the Kohen got to eat from. But this was a carbon that both the Kohen and the one who brought it got to eat from it. So when everyone gets their due, when everyone could benefit in a legitimate way from something, then everyone's happy. When everyone's happy, that creates peace in the world. So therefore, the shlamim created peace in the world. But there's another reason given by the Ramban. The Ramban says that the shlamim was not brought for a sin. So there was no guilt or shame. It was brought by a person whose heart is filled with gratitude to Hashem and joy, and therefore he brings a voluntary offering. And so therefore the word shalamim is also from the word shleimut, which means wholeness, completeness. In other words, it's brought with a sense of wholeness rather than inadequacy, that I'm guilty of some sin, but rather I feel complete, I feel content, I feel blessed, I feel satisfied, and I bring that offering from that perspective. And that applies to when we give charity. When we give charity, we help others, we create peace in the world, because we help make sure that everyone has their portion, but also it doesn't come from a sense of guilt or shame, but it comes from a sense, I feel so whole, I feel so blessed, I feel so complete, that I want to give a voluntary offering. But on the note of shalom, peace, we know that the main purpose of the Torah is to create peace in the world. And there's a true story that goes like this. There was a man who used to get a newspaper subscription every day in his driveway. One day, he looks out the window, he sees his neighbor in his pajamas and his robe, 6 o'clock in the morning, coming and taking his newspaper. He's shocked. But then, half hour later, the guy comes back and puts the newspaper back. And he realizes that this guy gets up early every morning, takes his newspaper, reads it, and then returns it so he could read it. So one day he confronts him as he's about to pick up his newspaper in the driveway. He says, "Hey, what are you doing? Ganef, thief, you're taking my newspaper." The guy says, "What do you mean? What's the problem?" He says, "What do you mean, what's the problem? It's my newspaper. You're taking my newspaper." So the guy was a learned Jew. He says, it says in Ethics of Our Fathers, "Zen nenev zelo chaser." If I benefit and you don't lose anything, and you say no to my request, Zen midat stom. You're like from the city of Sodom. Because if you don't lose anything, what do you care if I benefit? Why would you say no? He says, "I know you take your newspaper 7 o'clock. So I get up 6 o'clock, I take your newspaper, I read it, I put it back, I put it in the bag, I put it back. How do you lose anything that I read the paper before you read the paper? So why would you deny that pleasure that I have? You're from Sodom, that you deny me a pleasure at no cost to you." The man was really confused because he thought he had an open shut case. The guy's the thief. And now the guy turns it around that he's the bad guy for saying no to him to read a newspaper. So he decided to go discuss with his rabbi. He said, "Rabbi, am I right or is he right?" So the rabbi said, "Look, the truth is you're right, because, it's yours. He has no right to take it without permission. And, people like a crisp newspaper. They don't like one that's already been used, and you could tell the corners are bent and so on and so forth. So technically you're right." But he said, "You're a religious Jew, right?" He says, "Tell me, you spend money on buying tefillin, you spend money on matzah for Pesach, you spend money on a sukkah, on a lulav and an esrog." He says, just like there's a mitzvah to shake a lulav and esrog and to eat matzah, there's a mitzvah of v'yahavta l'recha kamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself. That's a mitzvah as important as anything else. He says, just like you're willing to spend money on this mitzvah, you should be willing to spend money on that mitzvah, because it's just as important, if not more important. He says, look, if you tell your neighbor he can't take it, you're going to be in a big fight with your neighbor and you'll never talk to your neighbor again. He says, here's my idea. He says, how much is a subscription for an annual subscription for the newspaper? $100, $150. So just like you buy an esrog and you buy matzah and you buy this, you buy that, buy your neighbor a subscription. Say, you know what? I want to be in peace with you. I like my newspaper not touched. I'm going to buy you a gift, a subscription. He says, you're right. And he says, you'll get a bigger mitzvah because you spent money on the mitzvah. So he goes and he subscribes for his friend, and then he says, listen, I've got you your own subscription. The guy was so touched, he was like, what? He was expecting a war, and he says, you're buying me a subscription? They became best friends. He insisted on paying for his own subscription. He didn't let him pay, and it resulted in peace. And the idea is that peace is such a valuable, beautiful, and important value that we should go out of our way, even if it means costing a few dollars. And by the way, they say the same thing is true in marriage, I remember there was a guy, he said, I have a special fund called a Shalom Bayis fund. So they say, what's Shalom Bayis? Shalom Bayit. Right? Shalom Bayis, Shalom Bayit. Your wife wants to spend money, she wants to buy something, spend it. It's a mitzvah, you create Shalom Bayis. Realize that sometimes a mitzvah costs money, and on the contrary, the more you invest in a mitzvah, the greater the rewards.